Honest J. Nowak. Coming at you live. Alright. A pleasure to meet y'all at last, and welcome back to Honest J. Nowak Graphix. Today's pick is gonna be Days Gone, released in spring 2019 as something different. Something different as opposed to most other open world RPG, shooter style, survival horror games of all sorts. And there have been a lot of other games out there that happen to have a lot of these categories put in. Franchises of all sorts, like Metro, Resident Evil, Ark Survival Evolved, of course. And who could forget many other franchises of all sorts of things that have been put on the PS4 or maybe other game consoles of all sorts. Days Gone was something different. Something different than most. As a matter of fact, straight off in the opening scene, it's really quite a thing to look at. The fact that there's a loading screen with a little demon sort of thing that looks like a ring on the bottom right corner of the screen, it really does show something that this game is going to have a nice sort of unique, fresh, new feel as opposed to most other games out there. You play as Deacon St. John, former military veteran, and who's also looking for lost love. And as a matter of fact, the title itself, Days Gone, does in fact show that, well, how long they have been separated from each other. Because after all, Deacon St. John does take a few survivors up to the rooftop of a building in the opening cutscene after a certain outbreak occurs. A very deadly one, akin to most zombie apocalypse movies that show us how dangerous it could truly be. But we still have yet to have one in real life, like those films. But above all that, Deacon St. John does in fact not see this lost love for up to 2 full years. Every time you pause the screen, it basically shows how many days had passed since that one moment where they both became separated. Upon receiving a special ring that does in fact have some sort of properties to it, Deacon St. John, along with best friend Boozer, both go along in their motorcycles into certain parts of an open world environment, where Boozer ends up getting ambushed and eventually tortured with a blowtorch to the arm. Man, that is freaking brutal. Well, anyways, though, as the game progresses, we do see a lot of things take place. And I mean a lot of things take place. We see Deacon St. John go into certain different encampments which do house many different survivors whom are trying their best to stay alive in the events of this apocalypse, in which the whole desolate wasteland that is this ginormous world, I'm not kidding, this is certainly bigger than the likes of Final Fantasy 15 or Ark Survival Evolved. The majority of maps in Ark are just beyond huge. But Days Gone pretty much makes it look like sissy sizes, in a way. Days Gone's map is just so unbelievably gigantic. I mean, you could spend hours upon hours upon hours out there looking for all sorts of things. You could look at the scenery, you could look at the destroyed cars, you can look at wreckages, fallen trees, collapsed buildings, of all sorts of things. As the story progresses, you do get to explore different environments that you weren't able to do so before then, but of course, when you even finish the story itself, you know what, I might as well talk a little bit about the story first, just in case y'all don't get any of this. Deacon St. John, like I said, rides along with Boozer. Boozer's arm gets incredibly burned up, and they both take refuge inside of a large lookout tower, for the time being. And for some time, St. John also comes across a few different encampments, at least a few in particular, before eventually giving Boozer certain medications and other treatments that would be necessary in order to make sure that the burned arm does not get any worse. And then they both go ahead and ride out, before coming onto a third encampment in the current area that they're in, known as Iron Lake. And this is where the story gets so real. Basically, Iron Mike, the leader of a liberal organization in this encampment in Iron Lake, is in fact determined to make the most of humanity for what it already has become in the faces of the apocalypse that had been around for a while. But Deacon St. John and Boozer, they both come across many other things. They come across one of the right-hand persons of Iron Mike known as Schizo. And Schizo turns out to be quite an unbelievably horrific person in the game. Quite an antagonist to get involved with, by any means. But as time goes on, lots of complications come by. The story does tend to get a bit confusing, but it's like with most franchises, like when Kingdom Hearts first came around, and with many other game franchises that had started with just one game at the time. We hardly understood what the story was like, the idea of it as a whole, but that's only because what could we expect from just one game? And believe it or not, there actually has been talks about a sequel. Well, you know what, I might as well just go ahead and continue with the ending just to avoid getting off track here. But of course, again, it gets to a point where a war ends up breaking out, and Deacon St. John is recruited by a militia organization to the south, led by Colonel Garrett. And Colonel Garrett happens to be quite a leader. An army, of course, that is in fact determined to bring down any and all anarchist organizations and any other sorts of things that have taken place. It gets to a point where we not only have one antagonist to worry about, Schizo, and not to mention another antagonist, a leader of a group known as the Rippers, who are beyond psychotic. And not to mention, but we also get the army of Colonel Garrett. So that's three that we have to worry about pretty much. We have Schizo, we have the Rippers, and we have Colonel Garrett's army. So, if it's not already complicated enough, then well, I guess we'll just talk about how the whole thing ends. The Rippers are defeated, Schizo is taken out, and Colonel Garrett ends up getting poisoned to death. Pretty much. Thanks to some clever planning going on. Deacon is reunited, and, well, all seems well. A whole new beginning is set upon. And every single survivor then has their own unique way of going with life itself. The game itself is very lengthy. It's very comparable to that of the length of most Final Fantasy titles out there. Final Fantasy VII, Final Fantasy 15, but the likes of which that the majority of other titles out there have also gotten pretty long in and of themselves. But above all that, I will say for sure that with an incredible arsenal, an amazing amount of ingenuity akin to Dead Rising, some survival horror tactics that are indeed similar enough to Resident Evil, and not to mention the kind of horror that comes out of most horror games like Outlast, pretty much. This game really does happen to be quite a huge amount of cross-references to most games, but in its own right, it does bring along tons of originality. With the story set in motion, with the kind of character design and arcs that are put in, and not to mention the sort of gameplay that comes along. It may be repetitive at times, it may get boring at certain points, and it might also have a bit of a different factor that outlies most other things out there in other games, but Days Gone was quite a unique masterpiece for the time period that it had come out in. Being a somewhat later title release for the PS4, who would have thought that it would turn out this good? Like I said before though, there were actually discussions about a possible sequel, Days Gone 2, but yet it almost seems unlikely, especially given all the recent info that we were able to gather from various articles talking about this exact concept itself. So by any means, it probably won't be very likely we'll ever have something like this. But even if it is real, who even knows? How could it be any better than the first one? Maybe we'll never know for sure. But anyways, Days Gone really is quite a unique piece of gaming mastery in all senses of the word. It sure was quite a lot of fun to play. It sure felt incredible to get to know so many things that had happened, and the lore that you can get out of this is just insane. I mean, I still have yet to look at the wiki page that they have of this, because I guess I've been distracted by a lot of other things, but nevertheless, it sure is quite an impressive piece itself. I'd certainly recommend anyone out there who goes to play it, and the fact that I was even able to download it for free on PlayStation Plus, that really does say something too. There are tons of other games out there that I've also downloaded on PlayStation Plus, and I will go ahead and talk about another one for tomorrow. But until then, if you want to see more go down on my channel, then make sure that you like, subscribe, comment, follow me on social media, and stay on the Hollywood side.